Going to admit a few more folks here, and I want to welcome everyone. My name is Aaron McMurray. I'm Chief Strategy Officer with Inovia Foundation, and I want to formally welcome you as we begin our fourth in our series of nonprofit endowment building workshops. We started this series all the way back in February, and it's hard to believe that it's 97 degrees here today, the expected high in the inland Northwest region, and it's June. So we're so glad to have all of you with us today. I wanted to make a reminder and just a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. First of all, just a reminder that we are recording today's session, and we'll be sharing that out with folks who wanted to join us and were unable to make the time work today. I also want to give a very warm shout out and thank you to our sponsor for our series of endowment building workshops, and that is Eide Bailly. Eide Bailly has been a tremendous partner with Inovia Foundation, and we have been so grateful for their sponsorship of this series of events, and also the fabulous work that Eide Bailly does in our region, working with nonprofits to support your work. So if you need assistance with accounting or any of the back end finance operations of your nonprofit, we couldn't recommend Eide Bailly more. They've been great partners to so many of us in the region. So a huge thank you to Eide Bailly. And with no further ado, we want to welcome everyone again formally to the fourth event in our series. This is also a part of our 5% Transfer of Wealth campaign. And as we move through our presentation today, I'm sure you will see many of the connections to our 5% campaign and the possibilities to take advantage of this 5% invested, fully committed call to action, and how each of us
Aaron, you're going mute.
I think someone may be muting me unintentionally. If people can try not to do that, that'd be great, to my co-hosts. So again, I just want to welcome everyone, and with no further ado, we're going to turn it over to our guest speaker, Judi Smith. Judi is a long-time planned giving professional, a leader in our industry, a consultant. She has experience working with community foundations in the state of Arizona and supporting the incredible work of nonprofits around the United States. Judi joined us with her colleague, Kristen, back in May for our third series in our events. And we're so pleased to have you back, Judi, and we'll turn it over to you. Welcome, Judi Smith.
I'm delighted to be here with you. I should let you know it's going to be just as hot where I am today in Arizona. So welcome to summer. It is indeed summer. We're going to do what I'm going to call a view from about 30,000 feet on some basic endowment building, and my screen doesn't want to, there it goes. First of all, we're going to talk about what makes a planned gift. And then I'm going to highlight what I would consider to be 4 really easy gifts that I think every organization should be able to do. And finally, let me give you some ideas to get started. But before we get into what is a planned gift, I would like you to pull out your phone and text to 22333 the words Judith Smith 175. When you do that, you'll get a message back, and then you can answer the question, what is a planned gift? If you answer it with a 2-word thing like banana peel, you have to run it together because it's only going to show 1 word at a time. So if you would text that, and then look for your message on your phone. Yeah, mine says you've joined Judith Smith's session, and then there'll be an opportunity to send in the answer to the question, what is a planned gift? Somebody's already throwing status.
Great.
All right, real estate, legacy. Lots of people saying legacy. I would guess Innovia has been doing some work in the community about legacy opportunities. Okay, we've got CRT, CRUT, advisors, real estate, insurance. Not sure what one is. It was probably part of something else. Lots of insurance. That's interesting. Okay. The bigger the type and the more prominent, the more people are saying that. So I'm not seeing a whole bunch of acronyms, which really pleases me because that's one of the turnoffs for people getting involved in plan giving. Lots of interest in insurance and real estate, and I'm not covering each one of those in depth today. So if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer those later. So as I move on, my computer is not wanting to advance. There it goes. So this is what I think of when I think of a planned gift. It involves an asset as opposed to cash. There's a professional advisor or custodian somewhere in the mix, which is great for us because it means that they're doing the heavy lifting and we're getting the gift. And because it's involving assets and because there's a professional advisor involved, it involves donor consideration or planning. So that's my definition of a planned gift. I love this quote from Willie Lohman. He was a bank robber back in the Depression. And when he was finally caught and the law asked him why he robbed banks, he very innocently replied, well, that's where the money is. Well, that's where the money is in our business. So Dr. Russell James, who I hope is someone that you know, he's at Texas Tech and he and his grad students do all kinds of research, did a presentation called Major Gifts of Assets in the Aftermath of COVID. And his numbers from the census in 2017 talked about just financial assets held by families. Notice that only 1 to 3% of it is in cash, and that includes money markets, checking, saving accounts, things like that. Whereas all the other financial assets are in retirement accounts, stocks and bonds, life insurance, mutual funds. Now, if I had a graphic, notice what's not on there is real estate. If I had a graphic that put family assets in the mix with real estate, cash would be about 5%, real estate would be about 25%, and all of the other financial assets would be about 70%. So if we're asking for people to give us only gifts of cash, we're asking them for the smallest slice of their assets. So just have to throw that out to keep you thinking on the right track. So we're going to talk about 4 easy gifts. And I will apologize in advance that this is really, really not detailed. If you have detailed questions, you can put them in the chat. I'll stop at the end of each section and you can ask questions after each section, or you can catch me at the end. So the number 1 gift that I want you to think about, if you don't do anything else, is bequest. They're the most common gift that people make as a legacy commitment or as a planned gift. you can read survey after survey after survey, and all of those surveys are going to say that 75 to 90% of all planned gifts go to nonprofits in the form of bequest. There's good reasons for that. First of all, it's revocable. It means you can't put it on your books, which means CFO you have it and take care of those people. But it is revocable, and that's why so many people do it, because it's quite possible that they might need the asset during their lifetime. And because it's revocable, they can pull it back whenever they want to. It's also very flexible. It lets them give a specific asset, like all of their IBM stock or any other asset they own, their real estate. It can be a specific amount. I leave $100,000 to whoever. It can be a percentage of the estate after all of the other specific bequests and the bills are paid. And it can even be a contingency. Very few contingency bequests, I think, come into actual realization, because that's like, if I die and all my kids die and all my grandkids die, then I give it all to the Girl Scouts. So very few of those contingency bequests happen. And depending upon how the bequest is structured, it can be anonymous. If the bequest is through a trust, then that's not a public document. If it's a will is a public document filed with the probate court. But if the person also has a trust, the will is likely to say, I leave everything to the so-and-so trust, and then you can't find out, what the bequests were. So bequest, if you don't do anything else, do bequest. Now, I think I referenced last time that Giving USA came out, I think in April, with a special report called Leaving a Legacy. And it was nice to see, because so many of the last Giving USA reports have not really gone into detail. And by the way, I think the report for last year will be issued on June 15th. But anyway, lots of their reports have not gone into detail on legacy gifts. But they reported in their April report, in their special report, that the average bequest is $100,000 to $250,000. And I would say that if you are just starting out in planned giving, that's probably not the size of a bequest that you will get. And I'm going to refer to another report that came out about a year ago. And that particular report had it broken down by budget size. So what it said is that if your budget for your organization was up to 10 million, it said that the average bequest size was 25,000 to 125,000. And again, if you're just starting to be in the business of telling your donors that you can take care of their legacies, then plan for something on the smaller end of it. But these are national statistics, all sizes of organizations, and I wanted to share that with you. So let's talk about who might leave you a bequest. Our friend, Dr. Russell James, says the #1 indicator is having no children. And if you look at his materials, you'll see a graphic where he talks about if they have kids, how the percentage likelihood of a charitable bequest goes down. And if they have grandkids, it goes down to like 17%. Now, that doesn't mean that people with grandkids aren't charitable, or even people with children aren't charitable. But the #1 criteria, let's face it, if you don't have kids to leave something to, then you start thinking about, what do I want to do? How do I want to remember? How do I want to be remembered? That legacy word comes into play. People are also making those plans and thinking about their legacy when something major happens in their life. Very often it's a negative nature, like a stroke or a heart attack or the death of a loved one. Occasionally, it's a happy change, like the birth of a grandchild, which causes them to change their estate plan. But those major life changes are times when people are looking at their legacy and thinking about how they want to leave it. A major change in assets is another opportunity. Retirement, winning the lottery. It actually does happen. I had a donor establish a scholarship once who won the lottery. So somebody's got to win the lottery. Might as well be one of your donors. Maybe an inheritance. That's probably more likely for most of our donors. And I don't want you to overlook those longtime donors and volunteers. Going back to that USA or Giving USA study, 78% of the people who leave a charitable bequest have been donors for 20 years or more. So don't overlook your longtime donors. Okay, the number one thing, if you don't do anything else with planned giving, promote bequest. And before I get into qualified charitable distributions, are there any questions in the chat, Aaron, about bequests? Anything I can clear up for anybody?
No questions yet, and that's a great little public service reminder. If folks have questions, feel free to use the chat box now. We'll be watching that and jumping in to address those along the way. So thanks, Judy. No questions thus far.
Okay, let's talk about qualified charitable distributions. Qualified charitable distributions come from a traditional IRA. If your donor has a Roth IRA, they don't have to take what's called a required minimum distribution. But most people who have IRAs started them before there were Roth IRAs to choose from. And if they haven't converted to a Roth, they have to take money out every year called a required minimum distribution. And the reason they have to take money out is because when they put the money into the IRA, the IRS said, we're going to encourage this savings plan for you, so we're not going to tax you on it. So they put it away tax-free. But when you take it out, you have to pay taxes on it. So a few years ago, the qualified charitable distribution came into play. And for anyone 70 and a half by December 31st, 2019, they had to take a required minimum distribution every year. And then last year, because of the pandemic, Congress said nobody has to take anything out of their IRA, just keep it there and let it grow. And then this year, the new age for taking money out is 72. Now, there are all kinds of funky things that happened with the law, and unless you have questions about what's taxable and what's not, anything that was put in there prior to the change in the law that comes out and goes directly to a nonprofit is considered a qualified charitable distribution. The key is that the donor doesn't take that distribution himself. The donor can give up to $100,000 every year. It doesn't have to be the whole amount of their required minimum distribution. It can be part of it. If they have to take out $10,000, they could give $5,000 to your organization and pay income tax on $5,000. But this is why a lot of people like it. We had a tax law change in 2017 that went into effect in 2018 called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And up through 2017, about a third of donors were able to itemize their deductions and take advantage of deducting their charitable contributions. But when that law went into effect since 2018, only about 10% of donors itemize. And many of the people who don't itemize are older, because one of the big deductions was on your home. And if their home is paid off, then that removed a huge deduction for most people. So you've got a lot of folks who have IRAs, traditional IRAs, who are in the situation of not itemizing. They're also required to take money out every year. They're going to pay income tax on that. And if they're already giving to you, it makes a lot of sense to recommend that they might want to give to you through their IRA instead of that little teeny slice, that 1 to 3% of cash of their financial assets. So my recommendation is find somebody who will give you a qualified charitable distribution, see if they'll let you write an article about it where they talk about how easy it is. They just called their custodian, said send $5,000 to whoever. And if they can feature it, then people react to it better than if you try to give them the stuff that you see on the screen and make them plow through all of that. So these are who your prospects are. Obviously, they have to be older, 70 and a half, 72. A lot of people who have IRAs worked for companies that didn't offer their own pension plan. So this was a way that they could save for their retirement. A lot of the people who will make this gift for you are people who are already giving. And if someone does make a gift to you through a qualified charitable distribution, keep track of that and thank them for it halfway through the year, and then ask them for it again for the following year. So questions about qualified charitable distributions? Anything in the chat?
Great. Yeah, we got a couple of good questions here. A question from Julie Morin about what % of donors will typically give a planned gift. And maybe Judy, you can just touch on some of those trends that you've seen in your work about whether annual giving, professionals should be concerned about rating their planned gifts, and whether, this good strategic work that you're talking about increases the likelihood that folks will make planned gifts.
Sure. If you were on the session that I did last month, I think, the research shows that people who decide to make a legacy commitment and put a planned gift into place are people who already love you and they're treating you like family. The research shows that in the 2 years before they make that change to their estate plan, their annual gifts go up. And then it goes up a lot higher immediately after they make that legacy commitment, and then it settles back down, but it's still about twice the amount that they were giving you before. So don't be afraid of rating your annual fund. It actually helps the annual fund. Did that answer the question, or was there something else, Aaron?
The wording, yeah, Julie says yes. I think she was also wondering if there was like a percentage of typical donors in a donor list that will make a planned gift.
You know what? I'm going to send Aaron after it's over. It's not something that I devised. It's something that Michael Rosen and Market Smart put together. But I'll send you a link to something that you can use to figure out who in your own database is likely to make a planned gift. And it really is kind of eye-opening. So Aaron, if you'll help me remember that after it's over, I'll find that and send it to you. And it's really, I recommend that you do it. I also recommend that you look at the range. And if you're just starting out, think about the low range instead of the high range.
That's great.
Any other questions before we go on, Aaron?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions about QCDs.
Okay.
There's a question about, is there a specific time of year that's best to promote QCDs? And then a follow-up question about what are some of the biggest objections to giving a QCD?
Okay, so let's talk about the time of year first. Actually, this is a great time of year to promote QCDs because the tax deadline was extended to May 17th, and people who have had to pay income tax have just written that nasty check to the IRS. And so they are thinking about taxes. So this is a great time of year to promote it. Then I like to promote it again in the fall, because what happens is that IRA custodians and financial advisors start nudging their people to make sure that they take that distribution that they have to take out for the year. So September and October, there's a lot of traffic in money coming out of IRAs, and that's a good time too. December is almost too late. So now is a good time, and then hit it again in the fall. And what was the other question about QCDs?
Great. Yeah. The question was, what are some of the common objections to giving to QCDs?
You know, it's not that it's an objection. It's just that since about 2005, when Congress started letting people do this, it was one of those on again, off again things where they would enact it for 2 years and then they would take it away. And then they would enact it again, and nobody knew what the rules were. So thankfully, at least in 2017, the rules got settled and everybody knows about it now, but there's still financial advisors who don't know about it. I was on the phone, it's probably been a year since this happened, but with a national company, one of the women who had been to one of my seminars said to me, my financial advisor tells me that I can't take a qualified charitable distribution and send it to my church. And I said, well, you certainly can. And she said, well, would you get on the phone with me and talk to him? And I said, sure. So I got on the phone with her and we talked to him, and he didn't believe me either. And so he called his headquarters in New York, and they said, well, we were on the phone, and they said, oh yeah, this is what you do, blah, blah, blah. So believe it or not, there's still some financial advisors out there who are sleeping or something, who don't know about it. But now that we've had like almost 3 years, I guess, of the rules being the same, I think it's getting to be more and more common. And that's why it's so important that you promote it and use the story of somebody who's doing it, because there are probably donors who still don't know about it. But I haven't really found an objection. There's not really a downside to it.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Judy. The final question we've got is a question about whether you're hearing anything, Judy, about whether Congress might be looking to lift the restriction on using RMDs to gift to donor advised funds.
There is legislation pending. There's been legislation pending to that effect for several years, and it comes and goes. I would be surprised if this Congress does anything about it, so I wouldn't look for any changes in effect for the next tax year. But it is a topic of conversation, and national lobbying organizations like the Council on Foundations, the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, all of those organizations continue to keep that in the forefront of our legislators' minds, but it's really not in the forefront of their minds. So I wouldn't hold my breath.
Thanks, Judy. That's all the questions for now, so we can probably keep moving. Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about publicly traded stock. Now, publicly traded stock is stock that's on the stock exchange or the NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, one of those. I'm not talking about what we call closely held stock, where someone gives you stock in their own private company. Publicly traded stock is a great gift, both as a legacy commitment and as an annual gift. And that's because when people have owned stock for a year and a day or more than a year, they are subject to long-term capital gains. And if they've owned it for a long time, they may have what's called a very low basis. So say they bought the stock at $10 a share, and now it's worth $100 a share. Their basis is $10. And if they tell their broker, I want to cash out and give $10,000 worth of stock to my favorite charity, so send me a check, if they do it that way, then they're going to pay a capital gains tax on that $90 worth of gain. But if instead they say to their broker, I want to give it to my favorite charity, contact Innovia or contact the charity and find out how to make that electronic transfer, then they don't pay that tax. And the capital gains tax depends on their income, but 20% is a fairly common number for what capital gains tax is going to be. So it makes a lot of sense for a donor to give you stock if they've owned it for more than a year, if it's worth a lot more than when they paid for it, because they get to, assuming they itemize, and most of the people who give you stock are going to be in that 10% that itemize, they're going to get to take a charitable income tax deduction, and they're not going to pay capital gains tax. I would caution you to make sure that you have clear transfer instructions. And this might be a good time, Aaron, to mention how if they have an Inovia agency fund account, how they can work through you to make that happen.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Judy. I appreciate that little public service announcement and a great prompt that Inovia provides a number of benefits for nonprofits around our region. And especially those that have endowments with Inovia Foundation, we can help you accept and liquidate gifts of highly appreciated assets like publicly traded stock, frankly, any other of the kinds of assets that Judy is speaking of today. And we offer that as a complimentary service to any of our nonprofits that have endowments that are held at Inovia Foundation. And so our passion and our specialty is helping you grow and build your endowments, and then providing you back office support, plan giving expertise to help you accept any of these kinds of gifts. One of our dreams for our region is that a local nonprofit would never have to say no to a complex potential gift, unless, as my colleague PJ Waters always says, it's a gift of timeshare. We don't accept that. But pretty much anything else, we'd love to work with you to find a way to turn that into a gift to benefit you. So please reach out to us, and having an endowment provides that as a complimentary service from our Inovia staff.
Terrific. Yeah, I strongly recommend you promote gifts of stock. It's so easy. It's just a call to their broker. The broker will have a form or say you have to put into a letter this particular piece of information. And then I'm sure that Inovia wants to know what's coming in, because so many electronic transfers don't have the full information they need. So you want to share any information that you get with Inovia to make sure that they can be on the lookout for that.
Judith, if I can jump in here, that's really important. We do have a securities transfer form, and we've made it available to all the nonprofits that have endowments with us, but it's available upon request. It's one of the few things that's not on our website since it has all our account numbers, but we do ask, and the instructions are on the form, that you provide us with a copy and your broker or the donor's broker with a copy so we can match it up. It's kind of funny how many times we get a gift of stock and then our CFO is trying to trace it down to see what fund it goes into. We will never deposit it to the wrong fund, but sometimes it can take a lot longer to find the right fund if you don't give us that form.
Yep, it's hanging out there in purgatory. Was that PJ?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really important. Use that form. And if you have your own brokerage account and you don't have a form, please make one, because it's really interesting. Sometimes I've had calls on April 15th where a donor is looking for a letter for their gift of stock, and we didn't know who to credit it to because they hadn't told us and nothing came with it that identified it. So important stuff. Okay, so just to recap, stock is an important gift for people who want to make a big gift. Stock is usually more attractive than cash in those circumstances, because not only do they get an income tax deduction, but they're not going to pay capital gains on any growth in that stock. Now, this is an example of prospects being employees or retirees from public companies, because if you work for a public company, very often you have an opportunity to acquire stock, or you acquire stock because there's loyalty to the company. So those are good prospects if you know someone's a retiree from a public company. but people with investments in general. And for some reason, stock gifts happen in the last quarter of the year. That's not to say that you might not get one today, but people who are making those larger gifts and looking at their assets are trying to figure out how much they might have to pay in taxes. They're visiting with their advisors in the last quarter of the year. And so if you're going to promote gifts of stock, October, November, those are great times to promote it because those gifts happen late in my experience. Would you concur with that, Aaron?
Yeah.
Okay, any questions about gifts of publicly traded stock?
You know, we did have a question, Judy, in the chat box, and I don't know if you're familiar with Washington state law, but Julie Morin was asking if there is a new capital gains tax in Washington state now that might affect the capital gains on gifts of appreciated securities.
I don't have a clue about Washington state law, but I can tell you that lots of states do have capital gains taxes that you pay on top of federal capital gains tax. So definitely check Washington, check Idaho, check wherever your donors are from. You know, just because you're in Washington and Idaho doesn't mean that your donors are from Washington and Idaho. So wherever their residence is, there may well be a state capital gains tax too, but I'm sorry, I don't know anything about Washington. My apologies.
If anyone else on the call might have any more information, feel free to put something in the chat box and share that out. I'm sure others on the call might benefit from knowing that information as well. Thank you.
Okay, your fourth easy planned gift are beneficiary designations. One of the objections you'll hear, not to gifts of qualified charitable distributions, but from people who maybe have already done their estate plan, they already have a will, they already have a trust, is that I've already done my estate plan. I don't want to pay my attorney to change it. Even if it's just one sentence, I've still got to pay my attorney. Well, a beneficiary designation passes outside of the will or the trust. In fact, those things, and sometimes people get confused because unless the beneficiary is the trust or the estate, those things get paid separately and the trust or the will doesn't cover it. So I noticed when we were doing the word cloud, a lot of people talked about life insurance policies. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about life insurance than I thought I would. A lot of people have life insurance because maybe when they bought their first house and they were afraid that the primary breadwinner might not be able to continue employment or might have an accident and die, they bought a life insurance policy that would pay off the house. Or maybe they bought life insurance policies to pay for the kids' education. So a lot of people who are older may have a life insurance policy that they really don't need. I mean, it might not even be in a safety deposit box. It might be in a desk drawer. So if you can find someone who has a life insurance policy that they would like to give, that's an easy asset for them to give away. They're not getting anything from it. It's probably paid up. There are lots of rules. Since 2006, when the Pension Protection Act came, we now have to have life insurance policies have an appraisal. And if that's your situation, I can recommend a couple of individuals who do that on a national basis. It used to just be the cash value, but they had to go get complicated on us. But nonetheless, it is a great gift that a lot of people have laying around that they don't need. And all they have to do is call up their insurance company, get a new beneficiary. Now I'm talking about a beneficiary designation, but if they actually want to make a gift of it, then they can also transfer ownership. If they're just doing the beneficiary designation, they don't have to have an appraisal or any of that. I kind of went down that rabbit hole because so many of you put life insurance in there. But for a beneficiary designation, it's simply calling up whoever owns the account, whether it's life insurance, whether it's a mutual fund account, a retirement account, and say, hey, I want to review my beneficiary form. And you probably had your spouse on there, maybe your sister, your mother, your kid, you know, and you can set up a new beneficiary form anytime you want to. Now, a caution is that if you're married, your spouse may have to sign, because if you live in a property state or community property state, your spouse has to say it's okay for you to give this asset away that you might expect to inherit. But they're simple, they're easy, they're flexible, people can change their mind, they can give you $10,000 of their investment account, or they can give you a percentage of their investment account, and they can change their mind. So beneficiary designations are super simple. And like everything else, find somebody to do one, let them tell their story about how easy it was. And as they say in England, Bob's your uncle. So those are all the reasons why. You don't need an attorney. It doesn't cost you any money. It's easy. It's changeable. If they don't want to tell you that they've done it, they don't have to. Although you really, it's kind of like PJ was saying about the stock, you really want to know. I've found that mutual funds and investment accounts are pretty good about contacting you. And I've found that life insurance companies, I have to contact them. So if you are the recipient of a future beneficiary designation gift, it's helpful to know what that is, but the donor has complete control. This is a great opportunity for younger donors to make a really significant gift. And I can see that, especially as you're doing your 5% campaign here, you may have some younger donors in the audience, or even people, you know, in their 50s who are still working. You think, yeah, you know, I'm not really ready to do that yet. This is a great way to train your younger donors to get involved with your organization as a legacy donor. Even if they're giving you a beneficiary designation on a term life insurance policy that's held by the company they work for, that's a great way to get them involved. And then if they change jobs, then you can reach out to them and talk about, all right, so now you're not working for Apple, you're working for Intel. Does Intel also have a life insurance policy, and would you like to switch that beneficiary designation to us? So don't overlook some of the younger donors. Obviously, we talked about older donors who don't need it. And anyone who has any kind of an account that allows for a beneficiary has the opportunity to make a charitable contribution through a beneficiary designation. So real quickly, because I think I'm running tight on time. Yes, I am. Easy way to build endowment with planned gifts. Bequest, 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 bequest. If you don't do anything else, do bequest. Qualified charitable distributions from your older donors. They do not have to itemize to benefit from this type of gift. Stock, probably from people who are itemizing, older donors late in the year, and almost anyone with a beneficiary designation. So get started. Put under your email signature, have you remembered name of your organization in your will? And put in your will, according to Russell James, you don't need to say estate, just say in your will. Everyone will know what that means. I think I already mentioned, after you get a gift of stock or qualified charitable distributions, 6 months later, write them a thank you note, a personal thank you note that says, thank you for your $10,000. This is what we did with it. Don't ask them for anything else. But then 6 months later, when they might do it again, they'll remember that you wrote them that note. I can't overemphasize the importance of featuring donors who make these types of gifts to make it clear how easy it is. And finally, let Innovia help you. That's what they do. They work with nonprofits. They want to help you build endowment. They want to help you accept complex assets. So with that in mind, I'll give you my Nike slide and say, just do it, and take any questions that you have if we have time.
Great. Thank you, Judy. All right, everybody. You can use the chat box. You can jump in and unmute yourself and introduce yourself if you want to ask a question. Judy, I will copy and paste your contact information into the chat box as well. So you can leave that slide up for a couple more seconds. And then if you want to unshare, then we can go back to our gallery view so everyone can see one another. I do want to point out too, as we're doing that, that we were joined by Scott LaPlante from Eide Bailly. And thank you, Scott, for your support of this event and our series of workshops, and also for dropping that article from your website in about the recent legislation. That was really helpful. Folks, jump in. What questions, comments do you have? Let's take advantage of the time that we have with Judy on the call with us today and her expertise. We've got some comments here about hoping to see some examples of how organizations maybe do some of these asks using social media, maybe on websites. I would also add to that, Deborah, maybe some examples from newsletters. If folks have any examples they'd like to put in the chat box and share out, that'd be great. We at Innovia can also, when we pull together our follow-up, share some of the examples that we've seen from some of our partners around the region that have done a nice job with their social media of including great prompts and reminders to their donors and supporters to think differently about how they can have the greatest impact, the greatest legacy. We've been encouraging nonprofits to even think about that kind of a language in everything that goes out from your organization, whether it's an e-newsletter, a thank you note, you're speaking at one of your events, you're posting something on social media. Do those little prompts and remind folks, have you considered a bequest or a gift of an appreciated asset? You could create a tremendous legacy and provide long-term support for fill in the blank, our organization. And that can be just a really simple strategy.
You know, I want to jump in and just share that having the wording will be helpful, but the most important thing is to just make a personal connection with people. Just have a one-to-one conversation. This is very personal, very private. People don't usually make significant planned gifts in response to something that they've received on email, social media, in writing, in the mail, etc. They do it after having a thoughtful, heartfelt conversation with the charity or with their family. So that would be the main thing I would say, is don't get hung up on the language. Just make sure you make the contact.
And in response to what PJ just said, I'm going to refer you to a slide presentation that you can find online called Words That Work by Dr. Russell James. And he simply talks about using family words. And that should put us all in our comfort zone, because you don't have to know those acronyms. You're not an attorney, you're not a financial advisor. You want to help them be remembered and how they want to be remembered through their commitment to your organization. It's just a very personal conversation.
I see there's a question in here also about charitable remainder trusts. And at Innovia, we have a few dozen of those, and they've been quite popular as our interest rates have started to increase. So we have a place on our website where you can actually just look at a calculator for a charitable trust and just play around with some of the numbers. If you were this age and you gave this much, what would your tax benefit be? How much income would you get? And we encourage you to do that. Maybe Chris or Aaron will plop that link into the chat box for everybody. But also we can create an illustration at no cost to anyone who's considering that. It really helps to see the tangible numbers. And again, these are usually funded with appreciated assets. because again, there's some tax benefits that they get from putting it into a charitable trust. And the main thing is that people do it so they get an income stream for life. If they're transferring a really significant asset, they may not want to transfer it all completely outright and not have any option to receive income on it. So Judith, I don't know if you have anything else to add on charitable trusts.
Well, there's so many types of charitable trusts, and a lot of them do provide income streams. They can also go for generations. They can go for a term of years. I mean, they're just really, really flexible. One of the nice things about them is that you can put illiquid assets into a trust, and the trust can own it. And then, of course, the trust will be the one paying the taxes on it. But yeah, I mean, they're so flexible. They're really the workhorse that I think most attorneys turn to when they're looking for a way to help a donor maximize not only their charitable impact, but liquidation of an asset, an estate tax deduction, income stream. I mean, there are just so many variables.
Great. Other questions or comments, feel free to use the chat box or just unmute and jump in and introduce yourself if you've got a question for Judi or anyone else on the call.
Are your brains full? It happens really easily. Can you imagine how your donors feel when you start going down here? You kind of have to keep the segments short so they brains don't explode.
Well, what we'll do here is we'll do some of our wrap up and closing comments. And while I do that, PJ and Chris and Judi, if you want to watch the chat box for any other questions that jump in, that way we can make time for those. But I do want to just share my screen, give another huge shout out to Ide Bailey. And thank you, Scott, for being with us today. Your sponsorship, your partnership is tremendous. We really appreciate that. I also wanted to remind everyone that Innovia Foundation is in the midst of our 5% Transfer of Wealth campaign. And of course, everything we're talking about today is a part of this campaign. And we're going to share just a couple of updates on the partner toolkit and the progress of the 5% Transfer of Wealth campaign and how you could utilize that to take advantage of some of the great tips and pointers that Judi has shared with us today. Just a reminder that in partnership with nonprofits, professional advisors, volunteers, and donors from all around our region, Innovia Foundation took advantage of a transfer of wealth study to launch a 5% transfer of wealth campaign. And one of the great outcomes of that partnership with so many leaders and nonprofits was the development of a partner toolkit that is full of resources that any of you are welcome to use. And as soon as I get done sharing my screen, I'm going to drop the link to that toolkit. It's in a Google Drive. You're welcome to go in and utilize any of those resources. It includes a brochure that you can customize for your organization, samples of social media collateral, a link to the web page that Innovia is hosting. That's a 5% landing page that features stories and data and other helpful resources. There's content for media and print ads, and then there's customized messaging that you're welcome to use for your e-news or blog posts or your own website. As a reminder, the strategy and the purpose of this campaign was to inspire everyone in our region to do the kind of planning that Judi's talking about in all of the examples that she just shared. And our hope is that across our region, whether folks consider themselves to be wealthy, but frankly, more importantly, even if they don't consider themselves to be wealthy, we know that people in our region feel a tremendous sense of loyalty and love to their local communities in Eastern Washington and North Idaho. And if they could be inspired and asked to give, many of them will do that. And so the urgency of this campaign is we're reminding people, don't wait, plan now to give 5% and make a lasting impact for your community or your favorite charitable organization. And we believe that messaging is really powerful when it comes from a local nonprofit leader or a board member. So we encourage you to join us in sharing out this campaign. And then just a reminder of the dates and where we're at right now in the process. We launched the first wave of the 5% campaign on April the 14th, and it will extend formally through June the 30th. Our plan will be to take a short break and then to relaunch a second wave. We're going to do some evaluation, some listening. We're going to elicit feedback from all of our partners and then plan for a second wave that would launch in the fall to take advantage of that really crucial end of the calendar year-end giving sweet spot, if you will. So what we're asking folks to do between now and then is to continue to use the collateral, share it out, and then give us feedback. What's working? What messaging is really resonating with your board members, your donors, your volunteers, others that you know, and please feel free to share that back with us. So with that, if there are any other questions that have popped up into the chat box.
Aaron, I just put in there the link to the calculator that Market Smart and Michael Rosen did to help you assess your own plan giving potential. So that should be helpful. Just, I would say, err on the side of the low end.
Great. All right, and I've dropped in the link to the 5% campaign toolkit, as that it has all of those resources that we just mentioned. And if there are any other questions, now's your chance to ask those. We'll leave the line open for a few more minutes. We will compile all of these links and references that have been made today in the call, and we'll send those out to all of you that joined us today. That'll include a copy of Judi's slides and a recording of today's event, so you can rewatch any part of that. And with that, we'll leave the lines open for a few minutes. Thank you for joining us, and please stay on if you have any follow-up questions for Judi or any of us here at Innovia. Thank you everyone for joining us.